In this video, I want to share with you an outdoor grill island that I'm building. It's going to have a small 4-burner propane grill, a monster wok burner on the right side, and space for an Argentine-style wood or charcoal grill on the left. I don't really like the tile look of many of the grill islands that I see out there, where they basically build a frame from metal studs, cover it with concrete backer board, and then tile or stucco it. But I do have some experience with concrete countertops, so I thought it would be cool to do a solid concrete top for the grill island. Then I had this idea to pour the whole island as a monolithic concrete structure from the ground all the way to the top. So, first thing I did was put the 3 cooking areas into CAD, set them up with a nice high countertop height since I'm tall, and then design the countertop around those constraints. Then I designed a plywood box around the concrete to act as the form, which is what I'm assembling now. When the concrete is cured, I'll strip the plywood form and we'll be left with just the concrete and all the cutouts already in place. Now, building the form is a little tricky because once it's full of concrete, you lose a lot of access. Parts that might have slid in place easy from the top now need to be removed from the bottom or from underneath the overhangs, and any screws with the heads facing the concrete won't be removable. You can always cut the wood, but to avoid damaging the concrete, I try to design the form conscious of how it would later come apart. At the same time, the pressure from the concrete, even with this form only being 3 feet deep, is 450 pounds per square foot at the bottom. So I found some design tables that you can use to look up the plywood thickness, the stud spacing, even the plywood orientation, which surprisingly makes a big difference, and the rate of pour in feet per hour to come up with a combination that won't blow out from the pressure. Here's what the form looks like so far. The 3-inch wide groove on the ends and down the middle forms the main walls to support the top. Of course, the top is boxed in to form a 3-inch thick countertop that overhangs the side and back, leaving the front without an overhang. I've got most of the supports in place on the back side here with some cleats that anchor the wall to the ground to keep it from moving. And for the Argentine grill, after I build the form, I'll remove it so I can pour up to that level before putting in the wood that will form the bottom of that cutout. That way I can make sure it's solid concrete underneath there. Same for this piece of wood that forms the top edge that the grill sits on. I'll pour up to there and then put this piece in place. I 3D printed the cutout for the wok burner and screwed that in place to hold back the concrete. It will also result in a cutout on the front for the control knob right about where those screws are sticking out. Underneath there won't be any supports in concrete, but I did put these 2x4 supports in to keep this long beam from sagging or cracking during pouring and curing. That beam will be under a lot of tension when it's complete, so I wanted to make sure that it was supported really well before that. To get the concrete to handle tension better, you need some kind of reinforcement, so now it's time for some rebar. I'm using number 4 rebar, which is 1/2 inch, and instead of overlapping it and tying it, I'm welding it without overlaps. I really wanted to be precise with where the rebar is so it stays in the middle of the 3-inch form, and overlapping the bars would mean there was less margin for error. Plus, when welded together, the structure seems to be a little less floppy while you're working on it. Unlike when I've tied rebar in the past, I didn't really have to work hard while building this one or even later when pouring to keep the reinforcement in the right place. I ended up with about a 7-inch spacing on the bars in the countertop, and I tried to think about where the concrete was going to be under tension so that I could have reinforcement in the right place and going the right direction. Going back to that long beam in the front, I have a piece of rebar at the bottom of that beam tied into the verticals at each side to take that tension load. I'll cut and weld a few more pieces in on the right side there at the countertop level, but this reinforcing structure is pretty much done. I learned a few lessons from pouring the pad that the island is sitting on, and to make it less tiring and a bit safer to dump bags into the mixer, I built a pivoting platform to hold the bag and guide it into the mixer. I also went and added some ratchet straps and bolted some parts of the form down to the ground as an additional safeguard against blowing out the mold. So here's the first 3 bag batches. I mixed up all the batches at a pretty low slump to try to get the maximum strength out of it and to minimize leaks. And I'm shoveling it in and then using a concrete vibrator to get rid of air bubbles and get a nice clean outside surface. The concrete vibrator, super useful. Concrete just liquefies around it and you can see the air coming out of it and the concrete settling down against everything. This project's probably not possible without one of these guys. So, here are batches 4 and 5. Again, 3 bags at a time, shoveling it in, then consolidating it. And I'm just about up to the bottom surface of the Argentine grill, so it's time to get that formwork in place. Put a big rock in the box to keep the plywood box from being floated up with the 300 pounds of pressure that's trying to push it up. And I am pausing between batches to try to keep the pour rate down to around 1 foot per hour or less. Next 2 batches takes us up to the countertop level and to the end of the pour. Got my wifey here to help screed off the top and to get it ready for finishing. And here's what it looks like with the pour done. You can see I have a 2x4 jammed under the strap. When I got about 6 inches below the top, I could see the form started bowing out. Probably should have more support on that front piece of plywood or a kicker back to the house wall or something. But I got lucky, I saw the bowing before anything really broke, and the form held even though it curved a little bit. So next up is some finishing for the top surface, a lot of cleanup, and then 2 weeks of cure time before removing the forms and installing the hardware in part 2.